Alrighty, so we've talked about how we analyze the competition, and hopefully you've done that worksheet where you analyze your 10 to 20 top competitors or collaborators in the space. In this lesson, we're going to talk about some of the different ways that you can stand out in a crowded space, and we're going to call this your authentic edge. Competitive edge is what businesses would call it, but again, we're trying to move away from the terminology of competitiveness and competition and more towards a terminology of authenticity. Because as Naval Ravikant famously says in his almanac, by the way, you might have noticed that the books have magically changed because these are the ones that are relevant for this video. Anyway, as Naval Ravikant famously says, you can escape competition through authenticity. And really, it's all about, in the creator economy, being our authentic selves because we are the only ones who can be our authentic selves. Having said that, we have 6 different dials of authenticity, dials that we can use to dial up one way or another to help find what our competitive or authentic edge is going to be. And the first dial we're going to talk about is the dial of unfair advantage. And this terminology comes from this book, The Unfair Advantage, which is written by my friends Ash Ali and Hassan Kuba, who I got to know through actually my YouTube channel after they published the book, which has won the Business Book Awards Business Book of the Year 2021. Basically, it's a fairly simple concept that we all have unfair advantages. Like their whole gambit is that success in the business world and probably in life is not just about work and hard work, like society might tell you. It's also a matter of exploiting your unfair advantages. For example, Evan Spiegel, the founder of Snapchat, has been open on record as to saying that he had the massive unfair advantage of money and status because he was very well connected, he had loads of money, and that made it easier for him to raise money for Snapchat. It wasn't just that he put his head down and worked really hard. And so what these guys basically say is that business success, and by extension, creator success, is about leveraging unfair advantages. And the good news is that we all have our own unfair advantages, whether we're aware of them or not. And they have a 5-part framework that we can use to help figure out what our unfair advantages are. And the letters they use for that are M-I-L-E-S. This is the Miles framework. So M stands for money, I stands for intelligence or insight, L stands for location and luck, E stands for education or expertise, and S stands for status. This is just one way of thinking about it. It's one framework for identifying your own unfair advantages if you think you don't have any. But coming back to this, like, what is an unfair advantage? An unfair advantage is an advantage that we have that is unfair. Unsurprisingly. But the way I think of it is that by unfair, it means that it's something that's very hard for someone to just outwork you in, or it's an advantage that's very hard for someone else to copy. So for example, if you are born with lots of money and a trust fund, that is an unfair advantage that's very difficult for someone to kind of take away from you or for someone to kind of override unless they also have that unfair advantage. And when I think of this, I distinguish unfair advantages from fair play. Like fair play is working hard, waking up early, putting in the hustle, putting in the grind, like outworking the competitors, outworking the competition, putting out more videos than anyone else. That is fair play. Like, Michael Phelps wakes up 4 o'clock every morning, dives into the swimming pool, practices swimming for like 8 hours a day. That's fair play. That's not his unfair advantage because he's putting in the work. That's completely fair. His unfair advantage is the fact that his body is built like an absolute fish in a weird way. Like he's got like an amazing wingspan. People have done analyses of his body and like, oh my God, he literally has the perfect body type to be able to swim. That's an unfair advantage. You can't out geneticify Michael Phelps. But you can, if you really wanted to try, you can outwork Michael Phelps. That's going to be one of the other dials. And one of the main things that I see when I do competitor analysis of creators who are successful and when we coach students in our YouTuber Academy, the ones who are successful at being creators and creatorpreneurs and building a business around it tend to be the ones who are leveraging their unfair advantages. So for example, when I started making videos on YouTube, I started off making videos for people applying to medical school at Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial, and UCL. This was a very niche group of people, but because I was a medical student at Cambridge and I had done well in those entrance exams, I had an unfair advantage in that I was already a Cambridge medical student. And so I could make videos aimed at Cambridge medical students or Cambridge medical applicants. And so through taking advantage of the status that I had through the Cambridge medical degree, the education and the insight I got through the applying to that process, I was able to leverage that to then target the audience for whom that was a relevant unfair advantage. If I was trying to make guitar tutorials or entertainment vlogs or cooking tutorials or breakdowns of businesses, or breakdowns of airports and airliners, or pretty much anything else other than that, the fact that I was a Cambridge medical student would not have been a particular unfair advantage. But I was able to leverage it because the target audience that I was going for and the niche that I was in, educating people who wanted to become a Cambridge medical student, really lended itself very well to that particular unfair advantage. I had actually tried being a YouTuber like 10 years before this. Like every year I would think, you know what, I want to be a music YouTuber. I want to play lots of instruments. I want to bring in my friends who are very good at singing, and I want to do covers of popular songs. I had a few tries of this, like 2 or 3 videos, and the first like 3 or 4 or 5 videos on the channel are actually music covers because I wanted to be the next Kurt Schneider. I did my competitor analysis at the time when I was like 17. I was like, I want to be like Kurt Schneider. He seems really cool. But it would have been a bit weird for me to be a music YouTuber because I didn't have any advantages in the space. Yes, if I had been a child prodigy when I was younger, like playing the piano from the age of 3 and like having perfect pitch and being able to play anything by ear, that would have given me an unfair advantage that someone else couldn't copy. But even if I had succeeded in getting started as a music YouTuber, I probably wouldn't have succeeded as a music YouTuber because I had no advantages in that space. So when thinking about how you're going to stand out in a competitive market, in a crowded market, when thinking about your own authentic edge, really think hard, like where do you have an unfair advantage? Where do you have the advantage of personal experience? If, for example, you're a 42-year-old parent of 3 kids, the fact that you're a parent of 3 kids means that you could possibly make content for other parents. I cannot copy your unfair advantage. It would take me a very long time to become a parent of 3 kids. So that's why it's an unfair advantage. It's an advantage that's hard for someone else to copy. Whereas if the way you're thinking of standing out is by lowering your prices and making more content than anyone else, that's not really an unfair advantage. It's relatively easy for someone who's younger and has more time on their hands to outcompete you by just working harder than you. Similarly, you've got channels like Peter McKinnon. Peter McKinnon started off on YouTube as a photography, videography YouTuber, leveraging the fact that he had 10 years of background as a photographer and videographer, and that he had a charismatic personality that he had honed through working as a videographer and stuff. He knew how to make tutorials. He leveraged all that to start a YouTube channel. Let's look at someone like Matt D'Avella. Matt D'Avella was already a documentary filmmaker who had made a Netflix documentary about minimalism. And so the YouTube videos he was making were leveraging the fact that he could already make documentary style videos. He already knew a lot about filmmaking and production value, and he was already like entrenched in the minimalism space. And so for him, it was relatively easy to blow up through minimalism documentary themed content. So yeah, that's the dial of unfair advantages. Figure out what your own unfair advantages are and try, if you can, to hedgehog conceptify yourself into a niche where you're leveraging those unfair advantages. And it does sort of relate to the, again, thinking of the hedgehog concept, that like little circle of what are the areas in which you could potentially be the best in the world at. And that generally is an area in which you're leveraging some kind of unfair advantage. All right, the next dial we have is the creativity dial. And the creativity dial is, can you stand out in a crowded market by being more creative, whatever that means, being more creative about the way that you make content compared to other people on the market. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that, again, like your content does not need to be better than them. It just needs to be creative in a different / better. It's like more creative or differently creative than the way they do it. For example, let's say you're competing in a sphere like mine, where most of us self-improvement bros are straight dudes talking to a camera and explaining things from personal experience. We're all fairly young, and so people might be like, well, like, what's a 27-year-old doing trying to give me life advice? For example, if you wanted to be more creative in this personal development genre that I'm in, we're all broadly kind of bros talking to a camera and explaining stuff. There are people like Matt D'Avella who add a creative flair by adding in more B-roll and more filmmaking elements. There are people like Nathaniel Drew that really think about background music and sound design and things like that. There's almost no one who is doing stuff in this space by leveraging artistic skills or like being creative in that department. I've kind of started dabbling with it by these sort of overhead pad type things, which we used for book club videos, which helped stand out in the space. But even if you are making kind of bog standard content about personal development, there are ways you can approach it from a more creative angle. And one of my favorite books for how to encourage creativity is, unsurprisingly, Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon. And he's got that Picasso quote, which is apparently that good artists copy, great artists steal, and that originality is just undetected plagiarism. And one other great way to add creativity to whatever you're doing is to combine ideas from multiple different fields. For example, the Nintendo Game Boy was created when like a guy working for Nintendo realized that he could use the same technology that was in pocket graphical calculators. And he saw some dude on the train one day in Japan just like playing on his graphical calculator, and he was like, hang on, that's interesting. That's a very cheap product. The screen is very cheap. It's very low resolution. But what if we potentially turned that into a games console? He was taking an idea from this random unrelated thing and applying it to the industry that he was in. Similarly, Austin Kleon talks about this in the book. Anything you would read about creativity talks about how being a connoisseur of multiple different things, like if you're trying to make YouTube videos and the only medium that you consume is YouTube, that's okay for understanding your market, but it's not very good in terms of being more creative. And so really, if you can bring in insights from other fields, other things that you're interested in, you can find ways to make your content more creative. I can't really give you more examples off the top of my head because it's like, creativity if I could just tell you, oh, make your videos more creative by doing X, it wouldn't really be an example of creativity. This is a place where you have to kind of go inward, try to explore outwards, look at what your interests are, look at what your hobbies are, and try and incorporate bits from different areas into the thing that you are trying to make videos or posts or content about. Another really good example, Tim Urban has an immensely popular blog, Wait But Why, which is in fact one of the most popular blogs on the internet. And the way he stands out is that he adds creativity to his writing by adding in stick figure drawings. Just like crappy stick figure drawings, and those have become so loved as a symbol of creativity and a way of explaining interesting and complicated topics, that's how he was able to stand out in the very, very crowded market of personal development bloggers. Next, we have the consistency dial. This falls squarely into our idea of fair play, because being more consistent than other people does in fact give you a competitive edge, gives you an authentic edge. And you might have come across the parable of the pottery class. If you haven't, I'm going to tell you what it is. Anyway, basically there was a pottery class, and the instructor in the pottery class split the class up into two groups. One group, he had make one pot for 30 days. So for 30 days, all they had to do was work on one item, one pot. And the other group, he had them work on 30 pots over 30 days. So by the end of the 30 days, they made 30 different pots. And then at the end of this little experiment, he got a bunch of judges together to judge the quality of the pots that were submitted. And every single one of the top 10 pots came from the quantity group rather than the quality group, i.e. it came from the group that made 30 of them rather than the group that made one of them. And so this is a lesson in quantity leading to quality. It's a lesson in consistency. The more consistent you can be with your videos, it stands out to the audience because now they know what to expect. Someone like Casey Neistat, when he first blew up on YouTube, he blew up because yes, his vlogs were interesting and creative. He had the creativity dial up. He kind of used his unfair advantage of being a filmmaker kind of in the background, but really he was uploading every day for 400 days or something ridiculous like that. And so everyone would know that, oh my God, this guy is really standing out through consistency. How many people do we know who upload videos every day? That's just absolutely insane. But that's how Casey Neistat was able to stand out on YouTube. There's another example of a creator called James Clear, who you might know wrote the book Atomic Habits. But what you might not know is that for 6 years before he published Atomic Habits, which became a ridiculous bestseller, for 6 years before that, he was publishing articles on his blog about habits, about personal development, every Monday and every Thursday for a solid 5 or 6 year period, even while he was working on the book. That was a level of consistency that even most bloggers at the time weren't doing. And so when it came to publishing his book, he already had that built-in readership, and he'd already honed his craft through so much repetition, so much quantity of content, that he was able to take all of his best ideas from the blog, put them into the book, really refine it more, do a bunch more research, and make the book an absolute banger, which is genuinely a really, really good book and fully deserves its place on the top of the New York Times list for the last 4 years. The next dial we want to talk about is a bit more of a meta point, and this is the authenticity dial. Or we might think of it as the exceptional authenticity. Yeah, let's call it that. Because you know how we said from Naval Ravikant that you escape competition through authenticity. That's a meta concept in general for how to stand out in a crowded market, but you can actually lean on the dial of authenticity as a way of standing out in your space as well. For example, one of the things that makes my content stand out on YouTube, or so people say, is the fact that I'm so authentic and transparent about stuff, revealing how much I earn, revealing how much I spend, breaking down all of my various income sources, and people view that authenticity as being a significant strength. And it's kind of a dial that we can ramp up and ramp down, but because in my space, most other creators are not being their full authentic selves and revealing so much personal information, it helps me stand out in a way in this crowded market. I'm not saying you need to reveal the contents of your bank account and the contents of your bank balance and the contents of your relationship. You don't need to do that to stand out, but it is one way of generating the authenticity, which is one of the 6 dials for standing out in a crowded market. To use another example, you might have come across Joe Rogan, one of the most popular podcasters in the world. One of the reasons why he stands out and he was able to stand out in the crowded market, especially in the early days, is that he was just able to be so authentic. He doesn't shy away from talking about things that interest him. He doesn't shy away from looking like an idiot. He doesn't shy away from controversial topics. And since Joe Rogan has exploded onto the scene, so many people have tried to emulate Joe Rogan. But as Naval put it in one of his interviews, you can't out Joe Rogan himself. He is the true authentic person in the space, and other people are sort of trying to copy him. In fairness, I'm trying to copy him with my podcast in a way, kind of, but that's why our podcast, that's one of the reasons why our podcast is not necessarily growing at the rate we would like, because it doesn't yet have its own unique spin. It doesn't have a way to stand out in the crowded market, as we talked about in the SWOT analysis section. The other way that you can try and get more authentic content is something that Peter Thiel famously talks about, and he has a quote which is, "Competition is for losers." And basically what he means by that is that if you're trying to stand out in a particular market, don't try and be the best person in that market. Try and be the only person in that market. So keep on like redefining the thing that you do, like niching down more and more until you are the only one in your space who is doing this sort of stuff that you're doing. So for example, I might not necessarily stand out as a self-improvement YouTuber, but I'm probably one of the very few YouTubers in the space who was a doctor or continues to work as a doctor and also does YouTube and also has businesses on the side. Like that combination of things means that I'm not in a very crowded market. Whereas if I was trying to do doctor content on YouTube, that's very crowded. If I'm trying to do personal development content, very crowded. If I'm trying to do business content, very crowded. But it's in the combination of those things that it becomes a particularly like authentic thing where I'm one of the very few people doing it. And that leads us on to dial number 5, which is killer combinations. And we kind of talked about this a little bit in the lesson about the hedgehog concept, where we talked about the idea in Good to Great. You want to find the thing that you're an absolute expert in. And basically the idea of killer combination, as I said in that previous video, is that it's very hard to be the top 5% or top 1% in an individual field, but it's relatively easy to be top 25% or top 20% in multiple fields. And so if you can find a way to combine multiple interests into one thing, that is another way of really standing out in a crowded market. One creator that's a really good example of this is someone called Bailey Sarian, who's been posting makeup content on YouTube since around 2016. But really her channel started to blow up in 2019 when she incorporated an element of murder mystery makeup into the channel. But it was really in 2019 that her channel seemingly randomly blew up when she started talking about real life murder mysteries while applying her makeup. This is completely random. Like, you know, she's good at makeup and she's applying a makeup, but she's talking about murder mysteries in real life. She's combining those two very unrelated fields and turning them into an interesting combination, which is what is making her channel explode. And you know, this is what she says in her channel description. Hi, my name is Bailey Sarian and I'm here to talk about true crime and makeup. Yes, this is an odd combination, but I couldn't just pick one topic to focus on. Why not mix them both together? So she really knows what she's doing. She's combining these two unrelated fields and no one else was doing that. And therefore she's being authentic and she's escaping competition through the fact that she's got this killer combination. To use another example, there's a chappie called Andrew Huberman who's recently exploded onto the podcast scene with the Huberman Lab podcast. Andrew Huberman is a professor of ophthalmology and neurobiology at Stanford School of Medicine. So that's like one massive unfair advantage he's got. He's got the education, the insight, the status, the pedigree to be able to talk about stuff. He decided to start a podcast where he interviews other like world-leading experts who he has unfair access to because they're all in the same field about things like, you know, health and longevity and living a good life and scientific stuff. And he's also quite charismatic and well-spoken himself. And also he's got his own team of researchers that can help him research stuff. So with this cool combination of like professor, world-leading scientist, also a good communicator, also has access to other people in that sphere, which is really unfair and it's hard for other people to compete with. He has carved out this incredible niche for himself where his content is fantastic, but he's really standing out and escaping competition through being authentic, through this killer combination of talents and the factors that really make him who he is. And the final dial that we want to talk about here is the primal branding dial. And this is another way to stand out in a potentially competitive niche by looking at this book. It's called Primal Branding. And this book kind of explains the stories behind some of the world's most successful brands, i.e. the brands that have real zealots behind them. So for example, if you think of the brand Apple compared to Dell, like no one is flexing that they're a Dell user, but like hundreds of millions of people love flexing that they're Apple users, for example. So what is it about a brand like Apple that makes it have such a strong zealotry fan base behind it? And the authors of the book basically boiled it down to a handful of different things that these brands do really well. Those are, you know, the creation story, the creed, the icons, the rituals, the pagans, the sacred words, and the leader. And we've taken that concept and we've applied it to the creator life through our Part-Time YouTuber Academy. And we have created for you a nice little worksheet that you can use to help define your own brand. And so the way we've done it is that there are 3 essential components to a good brand, and then there are 6 advanced components. So the 3 essential components are values, rituals, and icons and tokens, which are broadly the same thing. So values are, what are your core values as a creator? What are the values that maybe you don't explicitly say them in your content, but they come across through your content? So for example, we've got a bunch of different examples of mine over here: freedom, efficiency, journey before destination, diversification, lifelong learning, happiness is a choice, relationships are important. These are all values that I want to come through in my content. Secondly, we've got rituals. What are the repeated experiences that we have on our channel or within our content or on our blog or in our writing or whatever that make the audience feel like they're part of something? For my channel, for example, there's the intro of, hey friends, welcome back to the channel. If we look at Peter McKinnon, he's got it, what's up, Peter McKinnon here, and he has that intro in every video. And so when he doesn't do that intro, people start in the comments are like, oh my God, where did the intro go? Because it's a ritual that people have latched onto. Thirdly, we've got icons and tokens. So what are the physical things or the icons of your your channel that other people can associate with your channel. In my case, you know, one of the big icons is the glasses. I don't even need the glasses anymore. I've had LASIK, I've had laser eye surgery, and I don't need glasses, but I continue to wear them because they are kind of somewhat iconic. They're like a brand icon of the channel. This keyboard as well, you know, this colorful keyboard, the IQ Unix F96. The reason I bought this keyboard was because I knew the color scheme matched what I wanted the color scheme for my channel to be. And I deliberately started including it in loads of videos. And then loads of people started saying, oh my God, where's that keyboard from? And now like thousands of people have bought the keyboard through my affiliate link, which has made us like, I think, over $200,000 so far. But also this has become an icon. It's like become iconic and people are like, oh, where's the keyboard? When the keyboard's not in the videos. Equally, there's other things that we use, you know, apps like Notion, for example. Notion has now become an icon. It's almost become a meme that I use Notion for everything. Back in the day, it used to be the iPad Pro and an Apple Pencil. It's kind of an icon that whenever I have a sort of pen in front of me, I'll sort of spin the pen like this. People comment this stuff in the comments. And some of this stuff evolved accidentally. And for a lot of creators, their kind of brand icons do evolve accidentally. But for example, like in the case of the keyboard, the fake plants, this kind of stuff, a lot of this stuff was intentional. Like once I read Primal Branding and understood the concepts of Primal Branding, I tried to figure out what are the different icons that I can start incorporating into my content to make me stand out more in this crowded market. So those are the 3 main ones. The other 6 advanced ones are origin story, language, mentors, superpowers, enemies, and recurring characters. And on this worksheet and in the area down below, we've got a load more details about how you can identify and define these for your own brand, your own creator thing, whatever it is. And I've also got examples of how it is for my brand and for our business overall, so you can get an idea of what, you know, this looks like in the real creator world. And so have a look in the worksheet down below. We've got a bunch more exercises that you can use to help identify these unfair advantages: creativity, consistency, authenticity, combinations, and branding for your own channel. And hopefully these are 6 of the many different ways that you can personally stand out as a creator in a probably competitive market once you've done your competitor analysis. So hopefully that's been useful. Please do the exercise because that's really where the rubber meets the proverbial road. Thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next lesson. Bye-bye.